Hello, seventh graders. This is Mr. Shear, and today's topic is the start, part one of the Age of Exploration in Washington. And we're moving into information that you can find in Chapter 2, Lesson 2 of your book. Your assignment today is an Ed puzzle on Captain James Cook. It is not 46 minutes, it's 9 minutes. It does have some embedded questions. In order to get full credit on your assignment, you need to get over 70% on the multiple choice questions in the Ed puzzle. Also, if you aren't attending the meets, but you are watching the videos, I wanted to give you a heads up that tomorrow you will have your first history test. It is on Chapter 1 in your book. It's going to be a combination of multiple choice and short answers. It'll have the feeling of an assignment because it's open book, open computer, open notes, and I'm going to keep both the video for tomorrow and the Google Meet really short in order to give you as much time as you can to get the assignment done. You'll have till Tuesday of next week, but I would try to get it done tomorrow. And I just want to give you a heads up that assignments are 2 points, but tests go in the Skyward at 10 points, and tests are weighted to be 70% of your grade. So the point is, do your test. Again, your test will be posted tomorrow. That'll be your assignment for the day, and it's going to be a heavily weighted assignment, so it'll greatly affect your grade. Do your test. It should be 9 multiple choice questions, 7 short answer, due next Tuesday. So anyways, this lesson is about Washington and the explorers, which we'll come back to after your test tomorrow. I don't want to give you a test to start the week, so that's why it's kind of right in the middle of a little unit here. Before we get into the explorers, I want to give you a little context. This is a world map. As many of you guys know, Columbus discovered America, so sailing here, in 1492. Landed somewhere in the Bahamas down here. If you'll notice, it is Europe that sailed, and Europe that finally, after thousands of years, stumbled across North America and South America. And what you'll notice is that there is no way through the continent. So, in order to get to where we live here in Washington State and the west coast of North America, sailors either had to go up north through the Arctic Ocean, which is exceptionally cold and dangerous, or they had to go all the way down past South America, past Cape Horn, which is the southern tip of South America, all the way up here to Washington. This means it took a long time, at least 100 years, before sailors were really able to do that. It meant a lot more provisions on your boat. It meant a lot more danger, a lot less support, a lot less help, and it meant that the Pacific Ocean was far less explored than the Atlantic Ocean. It also meant that sailors were absolutely hopeful and convinced that a Northwest Passage exists. They thought for sure there must be some water route through either North or South America or Central America, but there must be a way in. And again, I want to keep in mind that they don't have a map like this. They don't have a picture like this. The early maps were often quite wrong. This is a map of North America. It's a French map from around the 1600s, and in this map, I mean, they believe California is an island, so at this point the French had been up a little bit on the west coast. They don't know where Canada goes. They're pretty sure the Hudson River goes really far inland. They have no idea how big this continent is. They don't have satellite imagery, and they are absolutely convinced that there is a way to cut through in a Northwest Passage. If you find that Northwest Passage, you would claim it for your country, and you would also be exceptionally rich if you could control the water route through the continent. That's kind of the context for the first 6 notable expeditions that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about two of them today, one briefly, one in more detail, and we'll move through the rest of them over the next couple weeks. So the first one is Juan de Fuca, who is a Greek sailor, and he worked for Spain, and he came to the Pacific Northwest in 1592. Second is James Cook, British sea captain. He's very famous now. He came to the Pacific Northwest in 1776. Robert Gray discovered the Columbia River, also came here in 1776. What's notable about him is he is the first American sailor here. George Vancouver, he names everything in 1792. We'll talk about him later. Of course, the first overland expedition is Lewis and Clark in 1804. And then I've got a personal favorite expedition or story because everything goes wrong, and that's the Astoria expedition, which doesn't get a lot of time in history, but that happened in 1810. So these 6 events we are going to talk about over the next few weeks, but we're going to start with number 1 on the list, Juan de Fuca. This is Juan de Fuca. And Juan de Fuca was not a captain, although he had been a captain at certain points, but he worked on a variety of boats that traveled in the Pacific in the 1500s. Now, in the 1500s, there were not many formal expeditions, certainly to Washington or the Pacific Northwest, or really on the west side of the continent at all. There were several pirate ships. Pretty much the Spanish are the only ones really out here. Russia sailed out here in the 1600s, but it's just a few boats kind of trying to make their way up the California coast, often looking for lost city of gold, or in the case of Juan de Fuca, his boat was looking for that Northwest Passage. Nobody knows if he actually came to Washington, but he was interviewed by 2 men later, and he described a water route that he saw. He described the Pacific Northwest, he described our trees, and it's pretty good evidence that he actually did come here, but he wasn't interviewed about it until way later. And 2 men back in Spain began to promote the Juan de Fuca Passage as a way to sell maps and to get explorers trying to get an expedition out here, hopefully to find a river or a water route that cuts all the way through North America. And what that led to was map makers put his names on maps, which is here. He gets this whole little section, blow it up, just north of the Olympic Mountains. This is Vancouver Island. And if you haven't noticed, Vancouver Island's quite big. So this is Washington, the Canadian border. Vancouver Island's big. So this section right in here is now called the Strait of Juan de Fuca, after Juan de Fuca, who may or may not have been here. Again, it was previously called by the natives. All of this was called the Salish Sea. So that's really the lasting legacy of Juan de Fuca. He's got a strait named after him in between Vancouver and Washington. The other thing he has named after him is a tectonic plate. Remember, there are small plates, or there are plates making up the world that our crust sits on, and the Juan de Fuca plate is the very small plate that's going under the North American plate that has caused all of our volcanic activity and may someday cause a giant earthquake. And this poor guy has the namesake of the plate that one day might cause an earthquake that kills us all. So good job, Juan de Fuca. All right, the second one I want to talk about more so today is Captain James Cook, who's very famous now, who came here in 1776. This is Captain James Cook, and yes, he is the inspiration, at least in namesake, for Captain James Hook of Peter Pan fame. This is his boat, the Endeavour. He ends up having 2 boats in his voyages. So just a little background on James Cook. As you can see, he's English, born in 1728, dies in 1779. He was a lifelong sailor, a very, very, very accomplished sailor throughout the Pacific Ocean, and he took 3 major voyages where he accomplished a lot. So his first voyage was to find a mythical continent of Terra Australis which he never found, but he did find the largest island in the world in Australia. So he finds Australia, he finds New Zealand, he discovers smaller islands like Tahiti. He also crashes into and discovers the Great Barrier Reef. On his second voyage, he never gets to Antarctica, but he does explore the southern Pacific throughout much of Antarctica, or really close to Antarctica, I should say, but he gets down to the southern Pacific and proves that there's not a land continent down south in the Pacific, which many people believed. And thirdly, he discovers the Hawaiian Islands, which he names the Sandwich Islands. He also comes to Washington and explores our west coast. And in 1776 and in 1779, 3 years later, on his return journey, he is killed in Hawaii by Hawaiian natives. So just a short overview. So Cook came here on his third voyage. As you can see, his travels were extensive. So the red line is his first voyage, the green line is his second voyage, and the third line is the purple line. That is his, red line first, green second, purple third voyage. And he explored, as you can see, Washington's coast. Now there's a theme to James Cook's voyages. He has a constant theme of attacking natives if peace negotiations break down. So he would land on shore in Australia. He met the Aboriginals, tried to make peace. When it didn't work, he'd fire his weapons and shoot to kill. He also had a very strong scientific team with him. They collected tons of sample and data of plants, animals, and they would bring things back to England, and he greatly expanded the knowledge of the English as far as the plant world. Third, he would claim land for Britain. Some of his major discoveries, just to recap, include the island of Tonga, Easter Island, and Hawaii, which he named the Sandwich Islands. Yeah, after the Earl of Sandwich, this guy. And Sandwich is a region of Kent, England. It's part of England. It's a small region. He's an earl, so he's a aristocrat from England. And yes, he did invent the sandwich. So the Earl of Sandwich invented the sandwich, which is why they call it a sandwich. And he was a friend of James Cook, so they named it the Sandwich Islands. It later becomes the Hawaiian Islands. Cook, of course, like I said, discovered Australia, claimed it for the British. He discovered the Great Barrier Reef when he crashed his first boat into it, and the Great Barrier Reef is the largest organism on the planet, and he is the first to really map and chart the coast of Washington and the Pacific Northwest. The last thing about Cook is his legacy of his death. He died under very mysterious circumstances in Hawaii, and it's a controversy today where historians argue about the exact nature of his death. There is one theory in which the Hawaiians mistook him for a god, and as part of their religion, in order to honor the changing of the seasons, they had to challenge their gods and kill their gods. That was a prevalent theory for a really long time, but he is killed by the Hawaiians. Many people later said, well, obviously they knew he wasn't a god. He's a white guy on a boat, looks different than anyone else they've ever encountered, and it makes the Hawaiians sound stupid to think that he was a god. They killed him because they didn't like him. They killed him because he was aggressive. They killed him because he wanted to take supplies and sailors and Hawaiian men from the island to work on his boat. They didn't like the way they treated him. So nobody really knows the exact circumstances, but it is known that Captain James Cook did meet his death in 1779 in Hawaii. So that's it. Just to recap, we briefly talked about Juan de Fuca. This video talks mostly about James Cook. Tomorrow's your test. The day after your test, we'll get to Robert Gray, and then we'll start in on George Vancouver and Lewis and Clark and subsequent days after that. So for more information, I'm going to talk a bit more, go into a bit more detail on James Cook and Juan de Fuca at the Google Meet. But for now, go eat a sandwich and watch the Ed Puzzle. Thanks for watching, 7th graders.